Osprey. The mention of this majestic raptor brings to mind crashing dives for fish, gull-like flight, distinctive facial markings, and an aquatic dependence that set it apart from other birds of prey. In Pennsylvania, ospreys have been classified as extirpated or extinct as a nesting species, and there has been no reliable evidence to show nesting in Pennsylvania since before the 1950s. This program is about an idea and a dream. The idea: to combine proven reintroduction techniques with new scientific theories. The dream: to reestablish nesting populations of osprey along Pennsylvania rivers and waterways. A return from forever. Four osprey subspecies are distributed worldwide. Ospreys indigenous to North America spend their summers here, close to oceans, bays, lakes, and rivers. Historically, ospreys nested across Pennsylvania with larger concentrations centered on the Susquehanna, the Lehigh, and Delaware rivers. As with many other forms of wildlife, the osprey fell victim to the 20th century. Agricultural technology was rapidly advancing. With it came numerous complex chemicals to make modern farming more productive and profitable. The most widely used pesticide was DDT, later found to be extremely harmful to higher vertebrates. Harmful levels of the pesticide began to accumulate in the fatty tissues of birds and mammals. In pyramid fashion, the highest concentrations reached the top of the food chain. In this case, the osprey. In female osprey, accumulated DDT blocked the manufacture of calcium necessary for a strong eggshell. On the nest, thin eggshells broke, and older parent birds died without producing young. The tradition of nesting ospreys in Pennsylvania died with them. Without human intervention, there was little hope of a new nesting population developing in the near future. In 1979, East Stroudsburg University biology professor Dr. Larry Ryman was approached by graduate student Charles Schott with the idea of reintroducing osprey to the state through a method called hacking. Dr. Ryman explains.
It's well known that ospreys return to their natal or birthplace to breed and raise young on their own. Our problem in Pennsylvania was that we had no active nests, and we had to start someplace. So we employed the method called hacking. Hacking is when man takes a young raptor and gradually, having hand-fed this bird, begins to go through a process that will help it reach hunting or fishing independence, and after which time the bird will be able to support itself.
With hacking as a feasible method of bringing ospreys back to Pennsylvania, a proposal was submitted to the Pennsylvania Game Commission. Jerry Hassinger, non-game biologist, explains the chances for success.
Before the Game Commission could okay the project, 3 criteria had to be satisfied. 1, the site chosen had to be within the known historical breeding range of the osprey in Pennsylvania. 2, there had to be an adequate food supply in the form of fish available at the hack site. And 3, and perhaps most importantly, the site had to be free from human disturbance. We had to be able to protect the young growing ospreys. The Poconos satisfied all 3 of those criteria, so we gave the go-ahead to the project.
As the project proceeded, it became a classic example of how wildlife agencies, conservationists, and private industry can work together to make a meaningful contribution to an environmental project.
The first year of the project, we received no funding except limited support from the university. As the project grew and our demands continued to go up, we needed additional funding, and we were supported by the Pennsylvania Game Commission's Working Together for Wildlife program and from the chapters of National Audubon, Pennsylvania chapters of National Audubon. The program continued to operate on that funding for several years, and in needs for additional funding came up. We also received that money, most recently, from Pennsylvania's program to work with the Wild Resources Conservation Fund. Now, the Wild Resources Conservation Fund, as you know, is the tax checkoff money that people pay to support threatened and endangered species. And all of these organizations are very concerned about the support of wildlife, both non-game and threatened and endangered. And our program fits directly into that format.
The artificial nest sites were constructed on a secure reservoir owned by the city of Bethlehem. Bell Telephone of Pennsylvania donated poles and materials. Bell employees donated their time to erect the original hacking towers. Metropolitan Edison Company provided another secure area and helped build towers at their Portland complex along the Delaware River. Hacking towers are constructed on 4 to 6 utility poles. A man-made nest, enclosed by lath strips, holds the young birds until they are ready to fly. A blind cloth with one-way mirror separates the osprey from the observation area. Once the hacking towers were in place, permits were sought from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The birds were obtained in the Chesapeake Bay area. Young osprey were made available through the Virginia Game Commission and the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. Biologist Paul Spitzer has been researching ospreys for almost 20 years.
Chesapeake Bay has an abundant and healthy osprey population. There are large numbers of excess young to use there for hacking projects. Naturally, these young do not tend to disperse very far. They're moving into the interior of the eastern United States to breed is a very rare event. The hacking project makes that a common event and gives you the real possibility of large numbers of ospreys breeding dispersed not only over the state of Pennsylvania, but over many surrounding states.
Bird's sitting there like there's some young in the nest, you know?
Yeah.
That bird.
Yeah. Like shading.
And down there looks like a couple young.
On that channel mark.
Yeah. There's 2 birds, but they both look like adults to me. Well, the one on the right could be a. Yeah, it's like a juvenile. A jumping juvenile.
Nests are checked to locate birds 4 to 6 weeks of age. At this stage of development, they have not yet identified their natal sites and adapt easily to relocation.
And fledging, so we probably aren't going to take anything here.
Osprey researcher Steve Cardano has been banding Chesapeake Bay osprey for more than a decade.
The ospreys here on the Patuxent River have been reproducing very well. The number of young per nest the last 2 years has been higher than in previous years, and that's a good sign. Well, there's a lot of fish here. Where the fresh and brackish water meet, there's a lot of mixing. There's a lot of nutrient mixing. There's a lot of plankton, and therefore there's a lot of young menhaden up here, young year-class menhaden. And so there's plenty of food for them.
After removal from Bay Area nests, young osprey are quickly flown back to Pennsylvania and distributed to the various hacking sites. To ensure safety and reduce stress, the entire process is carried out in just a single day. Before young osprey are placed in a hacking tower, they are first given a thorough health examination.
This looks like a female. See how heavy this breast band is compared to the one over there, the one in the box? It's possible this is a female right here.
Primary means of identification is established with leg bands. 2 bands are used on each bird. A U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service band and a numbered, colored band which identifies the individual and year of release. Accurate records are kept so information is readily available when birds return in future years. Hacking young osprey may appear easy, but it's tough, time-consuming work. Student interns have assisted in the hacking process since the project began. Many long hours are involved monitoring young birds on the towers and raising them from helpless nestlings to fledged juveniles. The birds are fed through a small opening in the canvas that shields the nest from the observation platform. Care must be taken to avoid human imprinting, a term referring to the identification of humans as their source of food.
These birds are about a week from fledging right now, or taking their first flight, and they really like these fresh fish. They really, you can hear them now as they vocalize and they begin to take the fresh fish. In fact, they become very aggressive sometimes to stick, especially if we only feed one bird. We always try to make sure there's plenty for more than one bird at a time to be fed, so that when we get them in there, there's no aggression in the nest. We don't usually do this until we're sort of late in the stage of hacking that we give them these. Sometimes I even prefer to put the fish in whole or flapping. Now each of them in there are making noise, and you can tell, and each of them has their own fish. They love these fresh fish at this stage. We've been feeding them frozen fish so long that they really do like the aspect of getting the fresh fish. They attack. They're very aggressive about attacking the stick.
Behavioral patterns of relocated birds have proven to be very similar to those in a natural nest. They rest, call to be fed, and exercise their wings to promote development of flight muscles. As the time for fledging approaches, usually about 2 or 3 weeks after being placed in the tower, the young osprey become more and more anxious to test their wings. Bruce Fortman, one of the principal investigators for the project, has spent many days from sunrise to sunset, feeding, guarding, and observing the young ospreys.
From the first time the ospreys leave the hack towers, we monitor their behavior throughout the summer until they leave for South America in about mid-September. The first flights take them anywhere that there's a convenient perch. Sometimes we watch them try and land in canopy that they've seen and looks solid until they try and land on it, and they crash through the smaller branches and keep right on going. And your heart comes up in your throat because you're afraid you're going to lose a wing or break feathers, and they always seem to come out of it all right. Sometimes they try and land on this railroad bridge because it's open. They can come at it from all directions, and we've watched first flights where they come into the top I-beam, which is about 10 inches wide, try and put down the landing gear and slide right across the beam and shoot out the other side, and then scramble to regain, wings and come flying back down through and turn around and try it again. They come in, look over the water very closely, fly in for their first bath, and again, sometimes the water looks solid and they hit it and keep right on going and wind up having to swim to shore, get out on the shorelines here in the open spaces and spread their wings out and walk around and cheep and try and dry out and figure out what's going on. Sometimes you worry about them because it starts to get dark. They're sitting down on the bank, raccoons, opossums, a lot of mammal-type predators, and yet you don't want to interfere with them any more than possible. We had one last year that climbed up on a stump about 3 feet high, and we debated about leaving him out there all night because each bird represents a seed population, so you do everything you can to ensure that every bird survives to dispersal. This bird, we debated and finally we decided to leave him be, so we just sat up on the bank all night and waited until it was morning, light enough to see, and there he still was. So we let him go as long as we could, hoping that he would get himself together and fly, but subsequently we had to go down and rescue him and return him to the hack tower. Provided him with food for another day, and he refledged, and from there on out he was fine. He was on his own. Some of them never need assistance after the first time they go. They're able to catch fish. We watch them on their first fishing attempts, They look awkward, their flying skills aren't perfected yet, make a lot of misses. And then you see them catch their first fish and fly up and start to eat it, and then that's one less bird you have to worry about.
The process of learning how to fish usually takes an osprey several weeks, although some require this skill in a couple of days. And a few have learned in a matter of hours. Until the young ospreys can fend for themselves, they return to the towers for food, just as they would to a natural nest to be fed by parent birds. Fledged ospreys remain in the area until early autumn. Then, shortening days and instinct direct them to the Caribbean and South America. Once the osprey reach the end of their southern migration, they remain in that area for the first winter, the next summer, and a second winter. Some then move north in the second year of life, but as non-breeders. Until the 5th year of the project, Ryman and his associates could only speculate about how far south the osprey were migrating.
One of our most interesting returns was when I received a band return from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service from Iquitos, Peru. I corresponded with the finder. His name was Jose Guerreros, a biologist from Iquitos. And this is an area about 3,000 miles due south on the 75th meridian. Now, to make the story even richer or more exciting was to find that this bird had migrated from our hacking area to Iquitos, 3,000 miles due south, in a period of time from September the 10th until October the 10th. That's phenomenal movement.
4 years after the project had begun, the first returning osprey was sighted. A 1982 bird, identified by its leg band, flew within 100 yards of the tower it had left 2 years earlier. In the next few years, more than 20 adults would return to the Pocono and Upper Delaware hack sites. The watch for returning osprey begins in late March to early April. Dr. Ryman keeps close watch on the hacking areas for returning birds. Local residents are quick to report any sightings or suspected nest activity to Dr. Ryman. So do Metropolitan Edison employees, who have become acutely interested in the osprey's progress.
4 or 5 years ago, I came to work one morning and I saw a company hole diggers in here digging holes for poles. And I wondered why they were digging holes in this area for poles. So I got a little interested in it and I asked them, what's going on here? They said, well, we're going to put poles in for hacking towers. What the Sam Hill's a hacking tower? And at that time, Dr. Larry Ryman happened to come along. He was head of this project. And he started to explain what a hacking tower was. They were going to raise osprey, reintroduce them to the Delaware River area.
I noticed Kim leaving every lunchtime and coming down the south end of the plant. But one day I asked him where he goes every day, and he says he's coming down to look at the ospreys. Well, I didn't even know what an osprey was at that time, and I came with him a few times and become interested in the project myself.
To me, this has been a very interesting project, watching these birds return year after year. And I know a lot of people in the plant have gotten interested in it too. And I hope to see these birds return again for many more years.
In early April 1986, a male was observed performing a courtship ritual known as a fish flight. Carrying a fish in his talons, he soars high in the air, alternately hovering and diving in a flamboyant display, demonstrating his ability to provide fish for the female during the nesting season. Concurrently, another pair of osprey began courting and nesting, near a hack site in the Pocono Mountains. At both locations, the pairs were observed carrying sticks for nest building. Both the male and female cooperate in the construction and arrangement of the nest. This stick-carrying behavior continues for repair and maintenance throughout the season. As nest building progresses, the frequency of copulation increases. This strengthens the pair bond and ultimately leads to egg laying and incubation. On April 25th, the scientists observed behavior which indicated the female had begun to incubate. During the incubation period, the male is the sole source of food for the female. The male brings the fish to the nest and presents it to the female, who then flies to a nearby perch to feed. At this point, the male assumes incubation duties. The Pennsylvania Osprey Reintroduction Program achieved its greatest success in late May, when observers recorded the first confirmed hatching of an osprey in Pennsylvania in more than 30 years. Hatching also occurred about a week later at the project's Portland site. The nest at Portland produced 1 young, and the Pocono nest yielded 3 healthy chicks. Young osprey grow from hatchling to the size of their parents in less than 8 weeks. Throughout the growth period, the adult osprey defend the nest from intruders. At first alarm, the young huddle in the nest cup. Whether the intruders are other non-nesting osprey that have returned to the area, or a curious great blue heron, the unwanted visitors are quickly escorted from the area. Fledging at the natural nest sites was very similar to that observed during the hacking process. Wing exercising, tenuous flights, and early fishing attempts were common to both situations. The Osprey Reintroduction Program is the first in the world to achieve the reintroduction of an extirpated nesting population. Important information has already been gained, not the least of which is ospreys can be successfully relocated, placed in artificial nests, and returned to the wild. Hacked ospreys do return to the towers to feed as they would to a natural nest, and they retain their instinctive ability to fish. Osprey research in Pennsylvania was designed to test restoration techniques and can now serve as a management model for any future osprey hacking programs. Paul Spitzer explains the worldwide potential of the Osprey program.
In Western Europe, Denmark and West Germany have not had breeding ospreys for many, many years, but there's an abundant source of young birds in Scandinavia and also in East Germany. So there's a real and very exciting possibility of reintroducing the osprey in several areas of the world where it formerly occurred.
Questions are often raised as to why a bird like the osprey should be reintroduced, or why should these birds be protected in the first place. Dr. Ryman explains his views.
These animals have been here from maybe as many as 50 million years ago, certainly as many as 17 million years ago, almost in the original form, fishing these hills and up and down this river, over the whole continent and around the world, through glaciers and through great geological changes. We came along and changed all that. We talked about what happened to them in DDT, we know what happened to them in persecution and shooting, And now we have an opportunity to use almost exactly the same kind of technology that took them out of existence practically in the 70s to return them, to bring them back. An animal like this needs the rightful place that it's had as long as we can give it to them. It's our duty to share it, to share the earth with things like this. Maybe that's why we hack ospreys. Maybe that's why we go through all this. I guess it is.
The idea was successful. Osprey once again are nesting and raising young along our rivers and waterways. The dream has become a reality. For the osprey in Pennsylvania, there has been a return from forever.